Well, good morning. Happy New Year's to you. I am obviously recording a video as I am not in person. I am off work with paternity leave right now. So what we as leadership of the church want to do is to make this service, this time together around reflection. It's become our tradition over the past 2 years to take the first Sunday of every year and make that a reflection Sunday. Many of us are making New Year's resolutions. We all have our reservations. We are trying to step forward into whatever is next or whatever God's calling us into this day and this week. But as followers of Jesus, we as ones that have taken in Scripture, identify time and time again, God calls us to remember. And I'm not going to preach today. I'm just going to share some reflections from us as a community. I'm going to let Kyle do that. But what is clear is that we move forward by remembering who God is, by remembering what God has done, both in history, both our history, but in time and history, in our community, in our own lives, and how God is moving throughout our community. So I would like to take some time and just share a bit of how we've seen God move this past year to allow you time to remember and to reflect. Because I think our next step and your faith is always in connection to what God has done and what God is doing. We shouldn't be just making things up. While creativity is good, we want to be partnering with what God is doing and how He is leading. So the past helps us to do that, and that's why we have a reflection today. So in 2022, I have a bunch of notes, and we'll see how they come out in this time. We saw a whole bunch of activity. Some good, some bad, some challenging, some simple, some beautiful, some not so beautiful. But one of the things I just want to lead off with, right off the start, is this last year we saw a bunch of new leaders. Just recently we had our Christmas party with our leaders, and it's amazing to see that we have so many more people investing their time, hearts, and talents into investing into your life and investing into our community. That Christmas gathering was probably one of my highlights from this past year, is just being around with one another, celebrating the good work that God has done by bringing Jesus into our lives and into our lives into community with one another. And so we had to celebrate that in a Christmas party. But it was such a good note to see how the number of leaders has grown. And so I want to celebrate that over this past year that we have grown with our leaders here. Another thing worth reminding you, because it was basically a year ago, that we had a marriage course available for couples, and how blessed people were by taking out the time to be together, to invest in their marriage. So if that is you, if you're one of those couples, remember what you learned. Take time to consider how you've grown or how you've strayed from the things that you really wanted to commit your marriage and your life together as. So we want to celebrate that. We had a lot of missionary connections growing. We had a dessert night start. We've had 2 of those, I believe, this past year. And something we'll carry on in the future when we have missionaries by. We'll gather around food, gather around fellowship, and gather around what God is actively doing through ministries locally and globally. We also had our gatherings. Sunday mornings started to become more relationally bound. As this past 3 years of my ministry here, we've had quite a ride, but this past year we started seeing with a gathering starting at 9:30 and a service starting at 10, that there is a connection happening before we come to sit and sing and listen around food once again and fellowship, that people were coming before the service, and maybe you're here today before the service as well. Thank you guys for letting us be a community, not just a space that we occupy Sunday mornings. This past year, we were praying for families, and we saw a couple families reach out to us. One of them actually just recently around Christmas time was reaching out again. We had also neighborhood kids become part of our program as we were praying for God to lead families that are tired and worn out. We've had amazing opportunities to love families, even in hardship, as many of you know that the family down the street, that part that's joining us, had their father pass this past year. We are still walking with them as best as we can, but we as a community want to be the people nearby, the ones that hear that call and get to love and support. We also had opportunity this past year to bless the refugee family. We got to invest a little bit of our time and effort as we were praying for them and they had need. So we also had those opportunities this past year. I got to sit down with a few people, but one in particular that was exploring faith. And we as a community want to be one that continues to allow people who don't understand or don't quite get Jesus to wrestle with that. So maybe you had an experience this past year where you got to wrestle through some faith questions, or you got to embrace the opportunity of sharing your faith with somebody. This past year, we saw some of our community grow. We have new members, we have new attenders or gatherers, whatever we want to call. We as a community are seeing a lot more new faces and new life. And this is also part of the conflict of all of this, is that over this last year we saw some families move on. And not all of it because of anger or frustration, just because seasons lead upon seasons and time. And sometimes God doesn't call people to be at this community forever. And so we had some celebrations and some opportunities to let people move on, move away, but that's still hard. And people coming in aren't replacing those who once were here. But we also are identifying that who once was here is not here anymore. And so maybe at this time this year, you look around the room and you miss some of your friends. And maybe that's part of your reflection today, is identifying what good relationships you've had and praising God for just those years, those moments that you have experienced in this room maybe, or around the conversations of who Jesus is and what he means for your life and their life. But we're also excited about seeing people come to our community and stay. People seeing that God is up to something new and fresh in Stanley Park as a church. This past year we had a rink, which was a huge blessing. We didn't do it this year, as you know. Doesn't mean we don't do it again, but one of the things we as a community don't want to be bound just because we did something once, we do it forever. But the rink was a blessing last Christmas to so many families. People maybe here or maybe in our community were mentioning that their kids were learning to skate on it. We would love to continue to create opportunities for memories and moments. Down our little street here, we have the pantry. That was something new. And it's been so heavily used, it's hard to even keep it like with anything in it. But that means the number of people that are in need are coming and finding something to sustain life, as we ultimately want to continue that conversation and care. But we know that if we don't care in just the smallest of ways, whether it is bringing food or providing an opportunity for somebody to supply them, we're missing out on part of what God does and how God loves the least of these, the marginalized, the vulnerable. We also had a community market we were a part of down at the community center this past summer, where we got to just be part of a regular community rhythm, where people got to see a church that loves to be with and is faithfully present. And that actually created opportunities where then we had a rental of kids coming through our space week after week after week after week. Not exploring faith, but exploring a spot where faith happens. They were here for tech. So we were able to be a hospitable host for a bunch of kids who would likely be less than churched or unchurched or de-churched in some way. And so that was also a thing that happened this past year. But we do want to continue to hold that tension that not everything is positive. That in our lives we've had hardships, we've had people in the hospital, we've had people struggling with health, mental health, relationship strife, all kinds of things. This might be you. You may have lost somebody this past year. You may have had situations where you just weren't truly yourself. You may have had the experience of people moving on past daily rhythms, and that's hard. You may have had job loss or loss of a rhythm. Some life practice of yours is missing. You may have experienced burnout. You may have seen people that you deeply care burn out. You may be having some of your family that has moved on, and you're looking and noticing the gap that they once were as they were locally living here. Maybe you are in continued challenge or conflict. And as we reflect back, we want to remember things as they were. We want to have integrity and name the peaks, the absolute beautiful moments, the highlights that happened, but not ignore the valleys. Because we know that God is with us in the peaks and in the valleys, that God is with us on this journey. And as we look back, our goal isn't just to celebrate the good. We do want to celebrate. And not just to mourn the loss and sit in grief. We do want to grieve. But the real heart and the beauty in reflection, and a reflection Sunday, is inspection. As we inspect the past, identifying where we saw God, where we needed God, allowing God to speak in the moments we missed him. And I think that's the beauty in this practice. We also got a parking lot patched because we had generous donations. We closed in some of our gap in our financial year. We had so many things that were also just God helping us through. And if we take time to inspect and reflect, I think our faith is actually better. I think our next steps into this next year are more sure, more secure, or at least in process of landing in a spot that life can happen. And so those are some of the highlights that I would love to share, some of the lowlights that I'm sure you've experienced. And I'm going to let Kyle take it from here. Kyle will lead you in a sermon and a message and hopefully help you land in a spot of reflection and inspection going into this next year. It's so good to be with you. I am looking forward to coming back. But till then, I am still on paternity leave, loving my wife, investing in my children, and hearing from God, seeing what He is doing in this time, in this season, as I have allowed Him to prune something I deeply love, you guys, and regular rhythm of teaching and investing, to see what He is doing in this time. So may you be blessed. May God be with you, and I am looking forward to dropping by again soon. Blessings for now.